The gavel slammed down with a thunderous crack, echoing like a gunshot through the tense courtroom. Conversations died instantly, and the packed audience froze in their seats. Every whisper, every shuffle, every nervous cough was swallowed by silence. All eyes turned to the man, seated at the defendant's table. It wasn't just any man. It was Kody Brown, the controversial patriarch of the reality TV series Sister Wives, a man once celebrated for his larger-than-life family, now reduced to a single figure under the blinding weight of truth and justice. Kody shifted in his chair, his face set in a mask of forced calm. His once golden curls, now flecked with gray, framed a face hardened by years of conflict and loss. He wore his pride like armor, but even the strongest armor cracks under pressure, and today the pressure was unbearable. He wasn't surrounded by his wives or children, who had once been his shield. Instead, he sat alone, his every word, every breath about to be judged, not by family, not by fans, but by the court of law. For years, millions had watched Kody live his unconventional life with multiple wives, juggling love, jealousy, children, and drama in front of cameras. To the world, he was a man fighting to keep a sprawling family together while battling criticism from outsiders. But beneath the glossy TV episodes and carefully edited storylines, cracks had been forming, cracks that now threatened to shatter the entire image he had built. This wasn't about family disagreements anymore. This wasn't about who loved who more, or who felt left out. This was about something darker, something that cut deeper than emotions. This was about money, about betrayal, and about justice. The judge's eyes bore into him, sharp and unflinching, as though they could see straight through the carefully rehearsed defenses Kody had prepared. The silence in the courtroom was suffocating, broken only by the steady scratch of the court reporter's pen. Cameras outside had already framed this case as one of the most explosive legal battles connected to reality TV. And inside, every person in the gallery leaned forward, waiting for the drama to unfold, eager to witness a man who had once thrived under the spotlight, now struggling under its harshest glare. Kody's mind raced. How did it come to this? He remembered the early days of Sister Wives, when his family was presented as a symbol of unity, resilience, and faith. Back then, his smile seemed unbreakable, his confidence untouchable. He had been the center of attention, leading his wives with authority, often demanding loyalty in return. But as years passed, that loyalty fractured. First came Christine, leaving him publicly, walking away with fiery words about his lack of respect and love. Then Janelle, whose patience had worn thin after years of being sidelined. Even Meri, his first wife, who had clung to him through endless heartbreak, eventually realized her loyalty had been misplaced. The women who had once stood beside him, defending his choices, now sat on the opposite side of the courtroom, their eyes filled not with love or loyalty, but with betrayal and determination. The audience could feel the weight of history pressing down on this moment. Here was a man who once commanded a household of 4 wives and 18 children, a man who appeared invincible under the spotlight of television fame, now cornered by the very people who had built that spotlight with him. His ex-wives weren't here as background characters anymore. They were his opponents, and the courtroom was their battleground. The air in the room was thick with tension. Every shift in a chair, every rustle of paper seemed louder than it should. The public had tuned in for years to watch family squabbles play out in living rooms, but now they were witnessing a fight far more brutal, far more consequential. There would be no commercial breaks here, no producers shaping the narrative, no cameras to soften the blow. The truth was raw, unedited, and merciless. Kody lifted his chin, forcing his expression into one of strength, though his clenched jaw betrayed the storm brewing beneath. He wanted to believe this was all a misunderstanding, that somehow the truth would shield him as it had so many times before. But deep down, he knew the evidence stacked against him was heavy. He could feel the stares of his ex-wives drilling into him from across the room, their silent message clear. This time you will not escape accountability. Christine sat tall, her face calm but her eyes blazing with quiet fire. Janelle's arms were crossed, her lips tight, as though she was holding back years of frustration. Meri leaned forward, her gaze steady, not with bitterness, but with a resolve that surprised even those who had known her loyalty the longest. They were no longer his wives, no longer his partners in a shared dream. They were witnesses to his downfall, determined to expose the man they claimed had betrayed them not just as a husband, but as a leader, a provider, and a father. The courtroom seemed to close in on him, the walls pressing tighter with every passing second. Reporters scribbled notes, ready to splash his name across headlines by morning. Fans outside the courthouse held signs, some in support, others condemning him, their voices a distant roar muted by the thick wooden doors. But inside, the only sound that mattered was the measured voice of the judge, steady and powerful, as they outlined the charges and the stakes of the case. Kody swallowed hard, trying to steady his breathing. He could almost hear the voices of his children, scattered between loyalty and resentment. What would they think when they saw their father on trial? Not for love, not for faith, but for greed. He closed his eyes for a moment, imagining the cameras rolling once again, capturing his every move. But this wasn't a reality show anymore. There were no retakes, no edited narratives to save face. This was real life. This was the end game. And as the courtroom braced for the first words of testimony, one thing was undeniable. The man who had built his entire life around control was now at the mercy of a system he could not manipulate. The gavel had already fallen. The battle had already begun. And Kody Brown's greatest fight was not for fame, not for love, but for his very reputation and survival. The courtroom was heavy with silence, every breath in the gallery caught in anticipation. Then came the words that broke it wide open. The prosecutor stood tall, her voice sharp as a blade, slicing through the air as she laid out the case against Kody Brown. The accusations weren't whispers anymore, not rumors passed between fans, or headlines spun by tabloids. They were charges spoken under oath, accusations that carried the full weight of the law, and they were explosive. She spoke of hidden accounts, missing funds, and unexplained withdrawals. A number echoed through the courtroom like a thunderclap. $200,000. That was the sum Kody's ex-wives claimed he had siphoned away from the family's joint finances, money meant to support not only the wives but their 18 children. It wasn't just a figure on paper, it was groceries, medical bills, tuition, car payments. It was security, stolen from the very people who had trusted him. The gallery erupted in gasps. Journalists' pens flew across their notepads, the weight of the number sinking in. $200,000 was not a mistake. It wasn't a misplaced check or a forgotten loan. It was deliberate, calculated, a betrayal that stretched back years. Christine's name was the first to surface. The prosecutor described how, weeks before Christine announced her separation from Kody, tens of thousands of dollars were quietly moved into an account she never knew existed. The timing was damning, the implication clear. While Christine was preparing to walk away, Kody was already protecting his money, keeping it away from the family pot. Janelle's face hardened as her turn in the accusations came. The prosecutor revealed how she had been left to shoulder debts and unpaid bills, while Kody allegedly spent lavishly on travel, vehicles, and expenses that bore no trace of family benefit. The courtroom audience shifted uncomfortably, murmurs rising as the picture came into focus. Janelle, known to fans for her practical, grounded nature, had been scrambling to make ends meet, while Kody, it seemed, lived untouched by financial strain. And then came Meri. For years she had been portrayed as the loyal wife, the one who clung to the marriage despite heartbreak and betrayal. But here, in the cold reality of the courtroom, her loyalty was revealed to have been repaid with financial neglect. According to the accusations, funds meant for her household had been rerouted, drained before she ever had a chance to see them. To the public, this was more than money. It was humiliation, a brutal confirmation of suspicions long whispered by fans of the show. Kody sat still, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the table. Every word was another nail hammered into the image he had crafted for over a decade. On television, he had insisted he was the provider, the leader, the man burdened with carrying an enormous family on his shoulders. But here the accusations painted a different man, someone less a protector, and more a manipulator. The prosecutor's voice rose as she laid out the pattern. Money vanishing at key moments, unexplained transactions hidden under the guise of family business, promises made but never delivered. She described it as a web, carefully spun to keep the wives in the dark, while Kody maintained control. The more she spoke, the clearer it became that this wasn't about a single mistake. It was about a repeated betrayal, one that had been allowed to grow until it consumed the family's trust. The audience inside leaned forward, hanging on to every word. They weren't just listening to a legal argument, they were watching a story unfold. A story of power, love and betrayal, brought into the unforgiving light of the courtroom. Christine's eyes never left Kody as her name was spoken again, this time tied to a family account that had been bled dry. The prosecutor revealed that while Christine had been struggling to manage household expenses and planning her escape from an unhappy marriage, Kody had wired money elsewhere. The betrayal wasn't just financial, it was deeply personal. To Christine, it confirmed what she had said during her departure, that she was never truly respected, never truly valued. Janelle clenched her jaw, her frustration etched into every line of her face. She had always been pragmatic, the one most invested in financial planning, the one who asked questions about sustainability. And yet, according to these accusations, even she had been blindsided, her trust undercut by the very man who had asked for her faith. Meri, though quieter, radiated a mix of anger and resignation. She had stood by him when others walked away. She had endured loneliness and heartbreak for years. And now, hearing these accusations, she seemed to realize that even her loyalty had been twisted into something Kody could exploit. The prosecutor turned to the judge, her words cutting and precise. This wasn't a case about misunderstandings or accounting errors, she argued. This was about a pattern of deception, one rooted in control and self-preservation. She described Kody as a man unwilling to share power, unwilling to let go of control, even if it meant betraying the very foundation of trust in his family. Gasps echoed again as emails were mentioned, emails allegedly showing Kody making financial moves behind the backs of his wives, justifying them as necessary for the future. To the court, they sounded less like strategy and more like excuses. The evidence promised to be damning, but even in this early stage, the accusations were enough to paint a devastating picture. Kody's lips pressed into a thin line as whispers swept the courtroom. He wanted to leap up, to defend himself, to shout that this was all lies, exaggerations twisted by bitterness. But he knew the moment to speak hadn't come yet. His lawyers had warned him, remain calm, stay collected. But calm was slipping from his grasp. With each accusation, each detail, the walls seemed to close in tighter. The eyes of the world were on him. Fans who had once tuned in to watch family dinners and emotional conversations, now watched to see whether Kody Brown, the man who had made his life an open book, had been living a lie all along. The accusations weren't just about money, they were about character, about trust, about the image of a man who had built his fame on the foundation of faith and family. And as the prosecutor's words rang out, it was clear to everyone in the room that this case was not just about a number on a bank statement, it was about betrayal. It was about justice. It was about whether Kody Brown, after years of controlling the narrative, would finally be forced to face the truth. The courtroom was alive with murmurs. After the storm of accusations, the air felt heavier now, charged with suspicion and tension. The words cut through the silence, landing heavily on the ears of those listening. Some leaned forward, intrigued. Others shook their heads, unconvinced. But Kody pressed on, his hands gesturing with the passion of a man desperate to be heard. He painted a picture of years spent in financial struggle, trying to hold together not one household, but four. He described the endless bills, the mounting expenses, the responsibility of feeding, clothing, and raising 18 children. "Do you think that was easy?" he demanded, his eyes sweeping the courtroom. "Do you think a single paycheck, a single income could stretch far enough to cover it all? I had to make choices. Tough choices. Choices no one else in this room has had to make." Kody's lawyers nodded behind him, letting him speak freely, knowing this moment was critical. His words weren't just a defense. They were a plea. A plea for understanding. For sympathy, for someone to see the pressure he had been under. He shifted. His tone softening now, almost breaking. "I didn't steal from them," he said, his voice wavering just slightly. "I protected us. When the money moved, when accounts shifted, it wasn't to betray, it was to safeguard. To keep this family afloat when no one else was willing to carry the burden." Do you think Christine was worried about the mortgage? Do you think Janelle stayed up at night, wondering how to keep the lights on? Do you think Meri was calling creditors when things got tough? No. That was me. Always me. Gasps whispered through the gallery. Some nodded, considering his words. Others exchanged skeptical looks. Their minds already fixed. But Kody wasn't done. He leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table now, his voice rising with emotion. "They accuse me of greed, of selfishness, of betrayal. But ask yourselves, what kind of greedy man gives up everything for his children? What kind of selfish man works himself to the bone, so that everyone else can sleep under a roof and eat at a table? I never betrayed them. They betrayed me. They walked away, one by one when it suited them. They abandoned me when the spotlight dimmed, when the pressure grew too heavy. And now they stand there, pointing their fingers, acting like victims, when the truth is, they're rewriting history to make me their villain." The tension in the courtroom thickened. Christine stiffened, her eyes flashing with anger. Janelle clenched her jaw, holding back a retort. Meri lowered her gaze, her expression unreadable. But Kody was relentless, his anger now spilling over into raw emotion. "You want to talk about money? Fine," he spat, pacing slightly. "Let's talk about the years of expenses I carried without complaint. Let's talk about the debt I swallowed, the sacrifices I made, the dreams I gave up so that they could have theirs. Do you think this television show paid for everything? Do you think fame meant freedom? No. It meant more responsibility, more mouths to feed, more expectations to meet. And when I tried to prepare for the future, when I tried to keep something aside so we wouldn't drown, suddenly I'm a thief, a liar, a betrayer." The prosecutor objected, but the judge allowed Kody to continue, watching him closely. His outburst was powerful, but dangerous. His words could inspire sympathy, or cement guilt in the minds of those who believed he was deflecting. Kody's voice cracked now, softer, almost pleading. "I loved them, each one of them. Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I dreamed of standing here, defending myself against the women I gave my life to? I made mistakes, yes. I made choices they didn't understand, yes. But betrayal? No. That word doesn't belong to me." He paused, taking a deep breath. The courtroom was still, the audience caught between the force of his conviction and the weight of the accusations that had come before. His eyes, glassy with restrained emotion, swept across the faces of his ex-wives. "Christine," he said softly, his voice trembling. "You know how much I sacrificed. Janelle, you know I always fought to provide. Meri, you know how hard I tried to keep us together." But their expressions didn't change. If anything, the silence from their side of the courtroom was louder than any accusation. They had heard these words before. Different settings, different moments, but always the same defense. And this time, they weren't swayed. Kody's fists clenched, the strength returned to his voice, fueled by anger once more. "You want me to be the villain?" he thundered. "Fine. But know this, if I am guilty of anything, it's of trying too hard to hold this family together, while everyone else was pulling it apart. If protecting what little we had makes me guilty, then maybe I've been guilty all along." The judge's gavel slammed down, calling for order. The gallery erupted with whispers, the tension spilling over. Kody returned to his seat, his chest heaving, his face a mix of defiance and desperation. He had spoken his truth, laid bare his defense, but whether it would save him or condemn him was a question that now hung heavy in the air. For a moment, there was silence again, the kind that lingers after a storm. But one truth was clear. Kody Brown was not going down without a fight, and this fight had only just begun. The courtroom had been filled with words, accusations, and fiery defenses. But now it was time for something colder, sharper, and far less forgiving than testimony. Evidence, words could be twisted, memories could be argued, but numbers, documents, and signatures carried a weight that was difficult to escape. The prosecutor rose again, her hands gripping a stack of binders, each thick with papers that looked almost ordinary, yet held the power to unravel everything Kody Brown had just fought to defend. She walked slowly toward the bench, her heels clicking against the wooden floor in a rhythm that felt like a countdown to disaster. The audience leaned forward instinctively, hungry for the revelations that were about to come. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady and clear, "what you will see today is not speculation. It is not bitterness, it is proof that Mr. Brown systematically concealed funds from his family for personal gain." She opened the first binder, her hands steady as she pulled out a sheet of paper and held it up for the court. Exhibit A. The clerk carried copies to the judge in defense. The sound of paper shuffling filled the courtroom as the first set of documents was distributed. Bank statements, cold, unrelenting, black and white proof of money, moved from one account to another. A transfer of $50,000, timed just weeks before Christine publicly announced her separation from Kody. The prosecutor explained the dates, the amounts, the accounts. The coincidence was too sharp to ignore. The gallery gasped audibly, the sound like a wave rolling through the room. Christine sat motionless, but her lips pressed into a hard line. She didn't need to speak. The documents spoke for her. The prosecutor continued, her voice growing more forceful with each revelation. "This was not an isolated incident," she declared. Another paper was raised. "Here, Exhibit B. An additional transfer, this time $30,000, moved quietly into a private account under Mr. Brown's name, while household accounts remained nearly empty." Kody shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His lawyer leaned toward him, whispering urgently, but his eyes stayed locked on the pages before him. His jaw worked as though he was chewing on every accusation, trying to grind them down before they crushed him. The prosecutor wasn't finished. She opened another binder, pulling out a series of receipts. "Exhibit C," she said, walking toward the jury box, placing copies in their hands. "Luxury expenses, trips, hotels, high-end purchases, all charged to accounts Mr. Brown controlled, while his wives were covering utility bills and grocery costs." She paused, then added, "Notice the timing. Each of these expenses coincides with a period when the family reported financial struggles." The audience erupted again, voices whispering, gasps echoing, tension swelling to a breaking point. The judge pounded the gavel, restoring order, but the damage was already done. Each receipt, each document painted a picture clearer than words ever could. Janelle sat forward now, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her expression grim but resolute. For years she had been the practical one, the financial planner, the voice of reason in a household that often ran on chaos. And now the evidence confirmed what she had long feared, but could never prove. Her trust had been misplaced. Meri's eyes flickered down to the documents in front of her. Each line, each number was like a betrayal in ink, confirming suspicions that had haunted her during long, lonely nights. For so long, she had wondered if the distance between her and Kody was emotional alone. Now it seemed, it had been financial as well. The prosecutor turned to the judge again. "Your Honor, these are not coincidences. This is a pattern, a deliberate effort to maintain control while leaving his wives and children in a state of financial vulnerability." She pulled another exhibit, this time an email thread. The words, blown up on a screen for the courtroom to see, sent a chill through those present. Kody's own words, instructing funds to be moved, justifying it as necessary for future investments, even as his family accounts dwindled. His phrasing was careful, professional almost, but the intention behind them felt clear. Kody's lawyer objected, but the judge allowed the evidence, his expression stern. The emails were dated, verified and damning. The words were his, and no amount of explanation could erase the timing, the numbers, the consequences. The audience shifted, the atmosphere heavy with a strange mix of shock and grim satisfaction. For years, viewers of the show had debated the real dynamics of the Brown family. Who sacrificed the most? Who carried the weight? Who was truly honest? Now here, the answers seemed to surface. Not through reality TV edits, but through raw evidence. Kody finally leaned forward, unable to stay silent. His voice, though quieter than before, trembled with desperation. "Those transfers," he said, "were for the family. You think I was planning a betrayal? No. I was securing our future, making sure there was something left when the show ended. When the cameras stopped rolling. You think TLC was going to keep paying forever? I had to think ahead." But his explanation felt thin against the cold clarity of bank statements and receipts. The prosecutor turned, fixing him with a look that was both sharp and unmoved. "If it was truly for the family, Mr. Brown?" she asked, her voice carrying through the silent room. "Why did your wives not know? Why were these accounts hidden from them? Why did you spend thousands on personal luxuries while they worried about paying household bills?" The silence that followed was deafening. Kody's mouth opened as if to answer, but no words came. His defense, so fiery before, faltered against the simplicity of the question. The judge tapped the gavel lightly, his voice calm but firm. "Mr. Brown, you will have the opportunity to respond in due course. Please remain seated." Kody lowered himself back into his chair, his face flushed, his hands clenched tightly on the table. His chest rose and fell with uneven breaths. The storm inside him cleared to everyone watching. For the ex-wives, the evidence was more than financial proof. It was validation. Proof that the doubts, the suspicions, the uneasy questions that had haunted them for years were not just paranoia. They had been right. They had been deceived. The prosecutor placed the final binder on the table, her eyes scanning the room. "This case is not about bitterness," she said firmly. "It is about accountability. The evidence shows a man who used control not only in his relationships but in finances, ensuring that those who trusted him most were left with nothing while he secured himself. These documents speak louder than promises. They speak louder than excuses. They speak the truth." The judge nodded, dismissing the evidence phase for the day. The courtroom buzzed with the sound of shuffling feet, low whispers and heavy sighs. Reporters rushed toward the doors, already preparing headlines that would explode across screens by evening. And in the middle of it all sat Kody Brown, shoulders heavy, his defense weakened not by accusations, this time, but by the cold, relentless power of evidence. The image he had worked so hard to defend was cracking, and everyone in the room could see it. The courtroom was already thick with tension, but when the judge announced that the ex-wives would be called to testify, the atmosphere shifted into something almost electric. People leaned forward in their seats, hearts pounding as if they were about to watch a long-awaited confrontation. For years, viewers of Sister Wives had seen fragments of these women's lives, pieces edited for television. But this was different, this was raw, this was real. The courtroom was already thick with tension, but when the judge announced that the ex-wives would be called to testify, the atmosphere shifted into something almost electric. People leaned forward in their seats, hearts pounding, as if they were about to watch a long-awaited confrontation. For years, viewers of Sister Wives had seen fragments of these women's lives, pieces edited for television. But this was different. This was raw. This was real. And now, their voices would finally echo without cameras to filter them, without Kody to talk over them, without producers shaping the narrative. Christine was the first to rise. She walked to the stand with her head held high, her face calm, but her eyes revealing the fire inside. She had always been the one who dared to speak her truth, the one who broke free first. Now, standing before the court, her voice carried the weight of years of silence. "I trusted him," she began, her tone steady but heavy with emotion. "For years I believed in the family we built together. I believed in his role as the leader, the provider. I gave him everything. My loyalty, my respect, my faith. But what I didn't know was that while I was fighting to keep my children safe, while I was holding our home together, he was moving money in secret. He was choosing himself over all of us." Her words struck like arrows. Every sentence peeled back another layer of the family's fractured image. She spoke of late nights worrying about bills, of moments when she questioned whether they could make it through, only to later discover that money had been hidden away. She didn't cry. Her strength wasn't in tears. It was in her calm delivery, her ability to speak with clarity after years of chaos. When she looked across the room at Kody, Her eyes didn't waver. It wasn't anger alone in her gaze. It was disappointment, the kind of disappointment that cuts deeper than rage. Kody avoided her stare, his eyes fixed on the table in front of him. His hand tapped nervously, his body restless. For years he had been able to dominate arguments with sheer force of personality. But here, with Christine's voice steady and unbroken, he seemed smaller, cornered by truths he couldn't easily deflect. When Christine stepped down, the audience murmured, their whispers filled with awe and sympathy. The judge called for order, and the second wife approached the stand. Janelle moved with quiet determination, her expression calm, but her jaw set with resolve. Where Christine's testimony had been fiery and direct, Janelle's was methodical, detailed, precise. She spoke like a woman who had lived with numbers, who had balanced budgets, who had tried to make sense of a chaotic financial world controlled by someone else. I always believed in planning, she said, her voice clear and steady. I tried to keep track of expenses, tried to plan for the future, but no matter how much I planned, there was always something missing. Money that should have been there wasn't. I'd ask questions, but I'd get half answers. I thought maybe I had made a mistake. Maybe I was miscalculating. But I wasn't. He was moving the money, hiding it while I was left to manage the fallout. She described long nights worrying about bills, calling creditors, moving funds from one account to another just to keep the family afloat. She spoke of moments when she swallowed her pride to ask Kody directly, only to be dismissed with vague reassurances. He made me feel like I was crazy, she admitted, her voice tightening, like I was imagining the problems. But now, seeing this evidence, I know I wasn't. I was right all along. He was the one creating the chaos, not me. Her testimony landed like hammer blows, each fact more damning than the last. Christine's voice had carried emotion, but Janelle's carried logic, numbers and timelines that lined up seamlessly with the evidence already presented. Together, their words formed a devastating pattern: deception, neglect, betrayal. Kody shifted again, his face flushing as Janelle's calm precision cut through his defense. He clenched his fists, his lips pressed into a tight line. His lawyers whispered frantically to him, but he didn't respond. The storm in his chest was visible to everyone in the room. Then it was Meri's turn. The room fell into a heavy silence as she walked to the stand. Of all the wives, Meri had been the most complex in the public eye, the one who had stayed the longest despite heartbreak, the one whose loyalty had often been questioned, the one who had endured more than anyone could have guessed. Her steps were slow, deliberate, and when she sat, she paused before speaking, as though she was summoning the strength to finally let go of years of silence. Her voice was soft, almost fragile at first. I stood by him, she whispered, her words barely above a breath. When others doubted him, when others left, I stayed. Even when my heart was breaking, I stayed. I thought if I stayed, if I kept showing up, eventually he would see me. He would value me. She paused, her throat tight, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. But now I see that even my loyalty wasn't enough. Even I wasn't enough. The courtroom was silent, the audience hanging on to every word. Meri continued, her voice strengthening now. She spoke of years of emotional distance, of being sidelined, of clinging to scraps of attention, while convincing herself that her devotion mattered. And then she spoke of money, of realizing that funds she believed were meant for their shared life were redirected, of feeling like even her loyalty had been exploited for convenience. I wasn't a partner, she said, her voice trembling with restrained pain. I was an afterthought. And when I look at these numbers, when I see the truth written out in black and white, I realize he never saw me as his equal. He saw me as someone who would never leave, someone he could use without fear of consequence. That is the deepest betrayal of all. Tears shimmered in her eyes, but she did not cry. She held herself together with dignity, her quiet words cutting sharper than any shout could have. The room was transfixed, the air heavy with the weight of her honesty. Kody finally looked up at her, his expression caught between anger and something softer, almost regretful, but Meri didn't look back. She kept her gaze fixed ahead, her shoulders squared, her voice steady as she finished her testimony. When she stepped down, the silence was deafening. The audience sat in stunned quiet, the weight of the three testimonies settling over them like a blanket. Each wife had spoken with her own strength. Christine with fire, Janelle with precision, Meri with quiet pain. Together their words formed a chorus of betrayal that rang louder than any accusation the prosecutor could have made. The judge sat silently for a moment, his expression unreadable, before calling a brief recess. The gavel struck, and the room erupted into murmurs, whispers filling every corner. Reporters scribbled furiously, already preparing headlines that would spread like wildfire. And in the center of it all sat Kody Brown, his face pale, his body rigid, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. For the first time he looked less like the confident patriarch of a sprawling family, and more like a man cornered, stripped of the defenses he had built for years. Words had always been his weapon, his shield, his control. But today the words of his wives had cut him down, leaving him exposed before the world. The judge's gavel struck again, calling the courtroom back to order after the heavy testimonies of Kody's ex-wives. The crowd had been murmuring endlessly during the break, replaying Christine's fire, Janelle's precision, and Meri's quiet devastation. Their words still echoed in the air, hanging over Kody like storm clouds ready to unleash a downpour. He sat stiffly, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles turned white, his jaw clenched and unclenched, his body restless in the chair as though he were trapped in a cage. For years Kody had prided himself on control. He controlled the narrative, the decisions, the finances, and at least in his mind, the family. But here in this courtroom, with the evidence spread across the judge's bench and his wives' voices echoing in everyone's memory, he had never felt more powerless. When the recess ended and the court resumed, all eyes turned to him. The silence was suffocating. Even the reporters, normally quick to murmur and type, seemed frozen, pens hovering above notepads as if waiting for the explosion they sensed was coming. Kody's lawyer leaned toward him, whispering calm words, telling him to hold steady, to let the defense strategy play out. But Kody shook his head, his chest heaving. It wasn't enough anymore. The weight of accusations, the humiliation of being exposed, the stares of strangers judging him, it all pressed in like walls closing around him. Finally he couldn't contain himself. He rose from his chair, his hands slamming against the defense table with a sharp crack that startled even the bailiff. His voice erupted, raw and furious, breaking through the courtroom like a storm breaking over calm waters. "You don't understand," he roared, his words echoing off the walls. "None of you understand what it took to hold this family together. I gave everything I had, my time, my energy, my money. I carried every burden while he gestured violently toward his ex-wives. They tore it all down, piece by piece." The judge banged the gavel, demanding order, but Kody was far beyond listening. His chest rose and fell with rage as he spoke, his voice cracking with the intensity of years of bottled frustration. "You call me a liar, a thief? You think I betrayed them? I sacrificed for them. While they questioned me, while they doubted me, I was the one making the hard choices. I was the one keeping the family alive when everything was falling apart." Christine's eyes narrowed, unflinching, as though she had expected this eruption all along. Janelle shook her head slightly, her lips pressed together, refusing to rise to his bait. Meri for once did not lower her gaze. She looked at him with a kind of sad clarity, as though she finally saw him for exactly who he was. Unmasked, raw, unfiltered. Kody's face flushed red as he pounded the table again. "I did what I had to do. I moved the money because I didn't trust them to handle it. Do you know what it's like to manage 4 households? To be the only one holding the reins while everyone else pulls in different directions. They talk about betrayal, but what about mine? They betrayed me long before I betrayed anyone." Gasps filled the courtroom at his words. Reporters scribbled furiously, knowing that every syllable was headline gold. His lawyers tugged at his sleeve, desperate to sit him down, to stop the bleeding words that were destroying the defense's case. But Kody wasn't finished. He pointed toward Christine, his voice shaking with anger. "You left me when things got hard. You wanted freedom more than family. You betrayed our vows." His finger shifted toward Janelle. And you undermined me for years, questioning my choices, doubting me, making me look weak in front of the kids. And Meri, his voice faltered for a second, as he looked at her, the years of shared pain rising to the surface. But his anger hardened again. Even you turned your back on me. I was the one constant, the one holding it together, and you all abandoned me. The courtroom erupted in whispers. The bailiff stepped forward, prepared to intervene, but the judge's voice boomed over the chaos. Mr. Brown, sit down immediately. For a moment it seemed Kody might defy even the judge, his chest heaving as though he was ready to unleash more fury. His face was red, his eyes wild, the veins in his neck standing out as though his body itself was straining under the weight of his rage. But then, just as suddenly, something shifted. His voice cracked, softer now, almost broken. I wasn't trying to hurt them, he muttered, his hands trembling as he gripped the edge of the table. I just wanted control. I just wanted to protect what we had. And now I've lost everything. The silence that followed was suffocating. For the first time in years, perhaps Kody Brown didn't look like the commanding patriarch of a sprawling family. He didn't look like the confident reality star, who always had a counter-argument, a justification, a reason. He looked like a man unraveling, a man whose empire had crumbled, and whose words had betrayed him more than any testimony ever could. The judge leaned forward, his expression stern. Mr. Brown, this courtroom is not a stage for your outbursts. You will sit down and respect these proceedings, or I will hold you in contempt. Kody's knees buckled slightly as he sank back into his chair, his hands shaking as he pressed them against his face. His shoulders hunched, his chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. The eruption was over, but the damage was done. The mask of composure, the illusion of control, both shattered in front of everyone. The ex-wives sat silently, each of them absorbing the moment in their own way. Christine's lips curved into the faintest of smiles, not out of joy, but out of vindication. Janelle simply nodded, as though this outburst confirmed everything she had always known. And Meri, her eyes glistening, sat perfectly still, her expression unreadable, but her silence said enough. Whatever loyalty she once held for him was gone forever. The audience sat stunned, the drama unfolding before them like a play. Except this was real life. Every camera in the room captured his downfall, every reporter's pen scratching the words that would be splashed across headlines by morning. Kody Brown melts down in courtroom. The judge's gavel struck again, commanding silence, restoring order, but the courtroom would never forget the moment they had just witnessed. For Kody, it was the breaking point, the moment where all the years of control, manipulation and pride finally crumbled into dust before the world. And in that collapse, one thing became undeniably clear. Whatever verdict awaited him, the man who once stood as the center of a family, the star of a reality empire, was now exposed as nothing more than a man undone by his own words. The air inside the courtroom was heavy, almost suffocating, after Kody's explosive outburst. The murmurs from the crowd had finally settled, but the energy lingered like the aftershock of an earthquake. Everyone sat on edge, waiting for what would come next. The testimonies from Christine Brown, Janelle Brown, and Meri Brown, the judge went on, his tone unyielding, corroborate a consistent pattern of secrecy, financial manipulation, and emotional exploitation. Their accounts, combined with the evidence, create a picture of misconduct that cannot be ignored. Kody's lips parted as though to protest, but his lawyer placed a firm hand on his arm, silently begging him not to speak again. His earlier eruption had already done enough damage. One more outburst could tip the scales even further against him. Finally, the judge leaned back, his decision clear in his eyes before he even spoke the words. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the final blow. This court finds in favor of the plaintiffs, the judge declared, his voice firm, echoing through the chamber. Mr. Kody Brown, you are hereby ordered to repay the sum of $200,000 to your ex-wives, divided equally among them. Furthermore, you will be subject to strict financial oversight for all future earnings related to the Sister Wives program and associated ventures. The gavel came down with a resounding crack, sealing the verdict. For a moment, the room was utterly still. Then, like a wave breaking, the silence shattered into a flurry of gasps, whispers, and the frantic scratching of pens. Reporters nearly tripped over each other in their rush to capture every detail of the verdict. The sound of camera shutters echoed like distant gunfire, capturing Kody's stunned face. Christine closed her eyes briefly, a small, triumphant smile tugging at her lips. It wasn't about the money, it never truly was. It was about validation, about finally proving that the man who had controlled their lives for so long was not untouchable. Janelle let out a long, steady breath, her shoulders easing as though a weight had been lifted that she had carried for years. The financial battle she had fought in silence was finally acknowledged, finally won. And Meri, though her face remained composed, allowed a single tear to slide down her cheek. For her, this wasn't just a legal victory. It was a symbolic one. It was the closing of a chapter she had struggled to end, the proof that her loyalty had been misplaced, but that she was not powerless anymore. Across the room, Kody sat frozen, his face pale, his mouth slightly open as though he couldn't comprehend what had just happened. His hands shook as he ran them through his hair, disbelief etched across his features. For years he had been the one making decisions, controlling narratives, setting rules. Now, in one swift verdict, he had been stripped of that control, humbled before the very women he once commanded. His lawyers whispered furiously, already discussing appeals, but Kody didn't seem to hear them. His eyes darted between his ex-wives, their calm defiance cutting deeper than any legal punishment could. To him, this was more than financial ruin. It was humiliation, public and undeniable. The judge rose, signaling the end of proceedings. The bailiff called for order as the courtroom erupted into chaos, reporters shouting questions, spectators buzzing with shock, lawyers gathering papers. The ex-wives stood slowly, their movements dignified, their expressions a mixture of relief and quiet strength. Kody remained seated for a long moment, staring blankly at the floor. When he finally rose, the cameras were waiting. The flashbulbs lit his face, capturing every flicker of rage, disbelief, and despair. He raised his hand as though to shield himself, but it was too late. The world had already seen. As he walked out of the courtroom, flanked by his attorneys, whispers followed him like shadows. The patriarch of sister wives, once untouchable, had been humbled by the law, by his wives, by the truth itself. And as the heavy wooden doors swung shut behind him, one thing was certain. Kody Brown's reign as the untouchable head of the family had ended. Not with an argument in his living room, not with a reality show twist, but with the strike of a gavel that echoed like thunder. The courtroom emptied slowly, but the echoes of the gavel still rang in every ear. Reporters swarmed like bees, chasing the ex-wives for statements. Microphones flashing, cameras rolling, headlines already being typed into laptops before the ink on the verdict was even dry. The tension of the trial had broken, but what remained was a storm of consequences. And in the middle of it stood Kody Brown, shattered, humiliated, and angrier than ever. He walked out of the double doors flanked by his attorneys, the cameras exploding in bursts of white light. His face was rigid, jaw tight, and his eyes glared at the reporters shouting questions. Kody, how do you feel about the verdict? Do you admit to hiding the money? Are you planning to appeal? But Kody said nothing. His lips pressed into a thin line, his fists clenched at his sides. Each flash of the camera was like salt in an open wound. For a man who had once thrived on being the center of attention, who had built his life on cameras and interviews, this was different. This wasn't fame. This was exposure. This was downfall. Behind him, Christine, Janelle, and Meri emerged together. For once there was no tension between them, no competition, no rivalry. They stood shoulder to shoulder, their unity louder than any words. Christine offered a calm smile to the reporters, saying simply, "This is about justice. That's all we ever wanted." Janelle nodded, adding, "It's not about revenge, it's about fairness, about accountability." Meri, her eyes glassy but her voice steady, spoke last, "We've carried this burden long enough. Today we can finally put it down." The cameras drank in their words. The image of the three women standing strong together, quickly becoming the defining moment of the day. They were no longer Kody's wives. They were survivors of his control. Voices finally heard, truths finally validated. Kody, hearing their words from a few feet away, clenched his jaw tighter. He didn't turn to look at them, didn't acknowledge their presence. In his mind, he was still the wronged one, still the man betrayed by those he had once trusted. His pride would not allow him to see himself as defeated, even though the world had just witnessed it happen. As the ex-wives left the courthouse, reporters and fans cheered for them. Some even called out, "We support you, Christine. We love you, Janelle." The women smiled, touched by the outpouring of support. It was a rare moment of triumph, not just legally, but emotionally. For once the public was firmly in their corner. But for Kody the aftermath was a nightmare. As he made his way to the waiting car, people in the crowd jeered, shouting words that cut like knives. "Thief, manipulator. You got what you deserved." Kody's face flushed red, his composure crumbling as he ducked into the back seat of the black SUV waiting at the curb. The door slammed shut, muffling the chaos outside. Inside the car, the silence was thick, broken only by the sound of Kody's labored breathing. His lawyers muttered about possible appeals, about damage control, about the next steps, but Kody wasn't listening. He stared out the tinted window, watching his ex-wives wave to supporters. His hands shook with fury, his mind racing. "They think this is the end," he muttered, his voice low, almost growling. "They think they've beaten me. But this isn't over. Not yet." Across town, the ex-wives gathered privately, away from the cameras. For the first time in years, there was peace between them. Christine laughed softly, the tension finally leaving her shoulders. Janelle poured tea, her practical nature resurfacing, even in victory. Meri sat quietly, reflecting on everything they had endured. "This isn't just about money," Christine said, her voice warm but firm. "It's about finally being free." Janelle nodded. For so long he controlled the narrative. He made us feel small, like we were crazy. Today proved we weren't crazy. We were right. Meri's eyes welled with tears. But this time they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of release. "I wasted so many years waiting for him to change. Now I don't have to wait anymore." The three women exchanged a look, one of shared strength, of mutual understanding. Whatever differences they once had, today they were united by survival, by justice, and by a newfound freedom from the man who had once bound them together. Meanwhile, outside the courthouse, the public was already buzzing. Social media exploded with clips of Kody's outburst. Headlines screaming, "Kody Brown meltdown in court. Judge orders Kody to repay $200K to ex-wives. Sister wives patriarch exposed in courtroom drama." The footage of him slamming the table, pointing fingers at his ex-wives, and breaking down in front of the judge, was replayed endlessly on every platform. Within hours the story trended worldwide, fans and critics alike dissecting every detail. Some expressed sympathy, others mocked him mercilessly. Memes spread like wildfire. His once confident face, now forever tied to images of defeat. But deep in the chaos, whispers began to spread. Rumors that this trial was only the beginning. Some claimed there were more accounts yet undiscovered, that the $200,000 was just the tip of the iceberg. Others speculated that networks and producers were already circling, ready to turn the courtroom drama into its own reality special. And then there were the whispers closer to home. Rumors that Kody himself was plotting a return, determined to rebuild his image, to strike back in his own way. Those who knew him best believed it. Kody Brown was not the type to disappear quietly. His pride, his ego, his hunger for control, would never let him fade into the background. As night fell, the courthouse stood silent, the frenzy of the day giving way to darkness. The ex-wives went home, holding their heads high, their futures finally untangled from the man who had once bound them in a web of control. They had won their freedom in the most public, undeniable way. But somewhere, in a darkened room away from the cameras, Kody sat alone. The mask of confidence was gone. the roar of the crowd replaced by silence. He stared at the stack of papers on the table, the verdict, the debts, the evidence of his fall. His reflection in the window looked back at him, tired, broken, but not defeated. Not yet, he whispered to himself, his voice low but burning with determination. This isn't the end. They think it's over, but it's not. I'll find a way. I always do. And with that, the story of Kody Brown's courtroom downfall closed. For now. But like all great dramas, the ending left one haunting question lingering in the air, unanswered and irresistible. Was this truly justice served, or just the beginning of an even darker chapter?